Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton and welcome to this Photoshop and Elements video lesson. One of the most common things that separates good portraits from bad ones isn't the subject, it's the background. If the scenery is too sharp, it can conflict with the person in your picture and confuse the viewer, with the two kind of fighting for attention. Much better is to have an out-of-focus background, so that the subject is pleasingly isolated against it. And though this is something that you should try and achieve in camera, it's not always possible, either because the amount of light in the scene is too great to use a very wide aperture, or because of the physical restrictions of your lens. The answer then is to apply a blurring effect in Photoshop or Elements, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do in this lesson. We'll first be making an accurate selection of the subject, then copying her to a new layer. We'll then blur the original background picture, forcing it to appear out of focus, and we'll also add a little bit of extra blur to the parts of her figure that are closer to the lens, so that we get a completely realistic shallow depth of field effect. I'll also be showing you how to deal with any fringing that you get around the subject when blurring the background, and finally I'm just going to add a light sprinkling of film grain over the whole picture, just to tie the blurred parts of the shot and the sharp areas together. So, without further ado, let's get started. I'll just close down the example image, and then if you want to practice on the same image I'm using, you'll find it on the disk, so just come up to File, down to Open, and navigate to the disk and choose the one called retro.jpg. Click Open, and it'll pop up on screen. Right, so the first thing that we want to do is make a nice accurate selection of the subject, just so we know which parts are going to remain sharp and which parts are going to become nicely defocused by the blurring effect. The way that we're going to do this is using the polygonal lasso tool. So come over to your toolbox and find the regular lasso, click and hold the mouse button down, and then come down to the one called polygonal lasso tool. Release the mouse there and you'll have access to that tool. And then before you start making the selection, just come up to the options bar, make sure that new selection is ticked, that feathering is set to 0 pixels, and that anti-alias is ticked. And then what I'm going to do is just zoom in quite close onto our subject, just starting on the face, and I'm going to just click once to start our selection. And then I'll just begin to very carefully and slowly click up around the side of her face. As you do that, you'll see a thin line appearing around the model, showing exactly where you're making the selection. And when you reach the edge of the screen, instead of sort of nudging it just to make it slide up, because that can go a bit funny, just hold down the spacebar on the keyboard. That'll bring up the hand tool, and you can click and drag it around. So just nice and slowly keep clicking around. Don't leave too many pixels between your individual clicks, or the selection will look a little bit jagged, especially around the hair here. We want it to be kind of nice and smooth, so we're just creating a kind of a really nice accurate selection as we go. And whatever you do, make sure you don't click too fast, or Elements will think that you want to finish your selection, and it'll take you right back to your starting point. The marching ants will appear, and you'll have to start all over again. Definitely one to avoid that. It's really frustrating. So just click nice and slowly as you go. Keep working around the edge of the subject. And because this is going to take me a few minutes, I'll join you in a moment. Okay, so here we are back out at a full view of our picture here. And as you can see, I've made this selection all the way around the edge of the model. That's where those marching ants are running. But if we look closely, just zooming in down here, we can see that there are no marching ants running around this area under her arms or between her legs there. So what we need to do is make sure we've got marching ants running around these areas as well. We need to subtract them from our initial selection because we want to blur these parts of the background as well. The way we do this is pretty simple. We just click on the Subtract from Selection icon up there in the options bar. No need to hold down any keys on the keyboard. We'll just click around the areas that we want to remove from our selection, just like so. And once I quickly get back up to the starting point there, those marching ants will appear. We'll just do the same further down the image here, Just working quite quickly in this case. You can probably take a bit more care over this when you're working on your own images. But as I say, we're just removing these areas from the selection that we previously made. So there we go. We're back out to a full view, and now we can see that what we've got is a selection of the model and the bonnet of the car that she's sitting on. Everything behind her, all those areas of background, is outside of our selection, and that means we can blur those areas without affecting her. Before we do so though, I'm just going to refine the selection a little bit just by pressing the Refine Edge button up here in the options bar. And what we're going to do is we'll take that smoothness down to 0, and I'm going to set a feather radius of 0.5 pixel. Once you've done that, just hit OK, and that, along with the anti-alias option up there, just gives us a slightly more kind of soft and photorealistic edge between those two areas. So what we want to do now is go about blurring the background, and the way we're going to do this is by first copying the model onto a separate layer. So bring your layers palette up on screen. Mine's just hiding off to the side there. You can find it under Window and Layers. And then to copy the model, I'm going to come up to Layer, down to New, and pick Layer via Copy. There you'll see in the Layers palette she's appeared above the original background layer there, and all of those checkers mean that there are no pixels on that particular layer, so we're seeing the background pixels below showing through. And these transparent areas are really going to help us when it comes to adding the blur, because if I just first click on the background layer in the Layers palette, then come up to Filter and down to Blur and pick Gaussian Blur, you'll see that all of those areas that we selected and copied to a new layer are remaining nice and sharp, and those transparent areas are showing through the blurred background layer below. And it's a really good example, this, of how important layers are in digital photography. Now, for this particular background, I'm going to choose a blur radius of about 30 pixels. That should be OK, and then click OK to apply it. And just like that, we've defocused the background. It's starting to look really good. One thing that is a bit of a concern though is if I just zoom in, you'll see that we've got this rather unnatural looking fringe running around the figure. The reason for this is that in blurring the background layer, we've kind of spread out a lot of those pixels, so they've effectively appeared around the edges of our sharp layer. We've kind of smudged them outwards, and that's what's forming the halo or the fringing effect. Now this can be a real problem because it makes your blurring effect look incredibly unnatural. It's definitely something that you don't want to see, but there is a quick and easy way of getting rid of it. All you need to do is select the Clone Stamp tool from the toolbox, and then, while still on the background layer, you simply clone out the fringe. The pixels on the layer above, of course, remain separate, so you won't be cloning over them, and you'll end up with a really nice sharp edge around your subject. So let's get started. We're first going to take the size of the clone tool down to about 150 pixels. And we'll make sure the mode is set to normal, the opacity is on 100%, that aligned is ticked, but then make sure that all layers is unticked. Then all you need to do is hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, which will bring up the little sampling icon there on the tool, and then we'll just click once to sample an area that hasn't been fringed, and then directly opposite it, just start painting over the model. Now immediately, if I just press Ctrl and Z, you can see that we've removed that fringe. Ctrl and Y to redo it, and you can see that just like that we're able to quickly and easily paint away the fringing around the subject. Just notice that the alignment on this part of the background is a little bit off though, so we'll press Ctrl and Z, and we'll just try and make sure that that's working a little bit better. Yeah, that's looking a lot better now, I think. So what you need to do then is keep sampling those unfringed areas of the background and working your way around the subject. And a bit like when I made that initial selection, because this is going to take a few minutes to go all the way around, I'll continue doing that and I'll join you in a moment. Right, so here we are once more then with our cloning complete. We've managed to remove that fringe that was running all the way around the edge of the model there. As you can see, it's all gone just by kind of sampling and painting up to the edge of her figure. We've got a much more kind of natural looking effect going on now, but we can further enhance the effect, make it look a lot more realistic by using the eraser tool. And this is especially useful around the model's hairline because we don't want that looking sort of too sharp against the background. We want it to have a little bit of kind of transparency to it. So over in the toolbox, click on that eraser tool there. And then up in the options bar, we want to set its size to about 40 pixels. Make sure the mode is set to brush, that the opacity is up at 100% to start with. And then also we need to make sure that it's got a good soft edge on this particular eraser. So we'll hold down the Shift key on the keyboard and just keep pressing that left square bracket key a few times just to soften up the edge. And then before we start erasing, just click on layer 1 because that's our sharp area. We don't want to be erasing on the background layer. Click on layer 1 and then you can just start sort of ever so slowly just kind of chipping away at the hairline there. And what it's a good idea to do here is just sort of vary the size and the opacity of the brush as you work around. So we'll make it a little bit smaller just by using that keyboard shortcut again, just using that left hand square bracket key. Take that down to about 20 pixels, and I'll also just drop the opacity of the brush, this time down to about 40%. And that just sort of lets us kind of chip into the hair, just so we're showing through a little bit more of the background around it. And once again, it kind of helps quite a lot to zoom in pretty far, maybe not that far, somewhere around there, about 200%. And we can kind of continue to drop that brush size so that we're really kind of chipping into the hair now, and almost kind of forming individual strands. And this might look a little bit choppy when you're kind of doing it really close up, but when you've printed out your picture at full size, you'll find that the effect is actually really good, and it creates a much more sort of natural join between the subject and the newly blurred background. So we're just kind of continuing to run that eraser tool around the hairline. Could even go a little bit smaller, perhaps down to about 3 pixels. And what it's a good idea to do is sort of periodically zoom back out again and just kind of see how it's working. So you may not be able to see on this video, but if you're having a go at this on your own picture or the example picture, you'll see that even though it looks kind of a little bit choppy kind of close up, as soon as you zoom out to about 50% or so, it starts to look a lot more natural. We'll just carry on working down the back of her head here, just creating that slightly more realistic join. As I say, you can spend a lot more time on this on your portraits at home. I'm just working quite fast, just giving that slight choppiness. That's going to kind of fool the eye of the viewer a little bit more and make them believe that she really was shot against a nicely defocused background. Okay, so that's kind of starting to work okay. We'll zoom out again, and as I say, it just adds that little bit of sort of texture around the edge so that the whole image begins to work a bit more convincingly. Right, so when you're done just kind of refining those areas, what we're going to do is further improve the blurring effect and the perception of a kind of a shallow depth of field just by blurring some of the parts of our subject that are slightly closer to the lens, her shoulder for instance, and those that are slightly further away, like her trailing arm and her right leg. The way that we're going to do this is again by adding the blur on a separate layer. So just as we did before, come up to Layer, down to New and pick Layer via Copy, or you can press Ctrl and J on the keyboard to make that happen. And then concentrating on that trailing arm first, just going to come over to the freehand lasso tool, and then just going to click and drag out sort of a rough selection over those areas that I want to add the blur to, including just this part of the car bonnet that's creeping in a little bit closer to the lens. Something like that should be okay. We'll first need to soften the edge of that selection though, so come up to Refine Edge again, and this time we'll use a feather radius of about 100 pixels, and that's kind of looking okay, so we'll hit OK. And then it's back up to Filter, down to Blur, and pick Gaussian Blur again. This time we don't want the effect to be quite as extreme, so we'll just bring that slider back to about 5 pixels, just knocking those areas slightly out of focus and making those in focus areas stand out all the better. Click OK, and then with our lasso tool again, we'll firstly just need to come back up to the options bar and put it on New Selection, and then I'll make a quick selection of that trailing leg, not being too accurate at this stage. I'll show you why in a moment. Back up to refine edge, 100 pixels is good again. Click OK, filter, and then instead of going all the way through the blur menu again, we can just use this option that's popped up, the previous filter option. Give that a click or press Ctrl and F on the keyboard. That'll apply the blur to that area. And then because I don't want to apply that blur to the sort of the underside of her leg there, that needs to be sort of as sharp as the rest of the model, what I'm going to do is just press Ctrl and D to get rid of those marching ants to start with. Then back to the eraser tool, we'll bring its size up to about 150 pixels. This time bring the edge sharpness up to just a little below full sharpness, just using Shift key and the right square bracket key this time. Then make sure that the opacity is at 100%, and then I'm just going to run that eraser tool just along that the lower part of her leg there and the hem of the skirt, just bringing those parts sort of back into focus, because we don't want them to be blurred, because that sort of ruins our shallow depth of field effect. A little bit of attention to detail kind of goes a long way, and we'll just take away that blur on that part of her leg as well. The final area that we're going to do this to is her shoulder, because again that's kind of closer to the lens and we can add a little bit of blur to that. So using the lasso tool, we'll just select that area, something like that should be okay. Back up to refine edge, use 100 pixels again, although I'm just noticing from the mask preview there that we're not kind of taking in that leading edge quite as well as I'd like. I want that shoulder edge to be really blurred. So what I'm going to do is click OK there, and then just hovering the cursor inside the selected area, just move that up a bit, just so that we know that that area is going to be sort of unaffected by that feathering. And then we can just press Ctrl and F on the keyboard, as I said, just to kind of shortcut to that last filter, the Gaussian blur. That'll knock the shoulder out of focus, you can see it happening. And then we'll deselect those marching ants, that selection, back to the eraser tool, and then what I can do is just bring back the sharpness on the model's face just by erasing through that part, but I leave the shoulder quite soft. So it's just kind of giving you that idea that those areas that are closer to the lens or further away from our point of focus are just kind of falling out of focus and becoming diffused. Okay, so that's pretty much it for our blurring background technique. The last thing I'm going to do is just add a tiny bit of digital noise to the picture, because what you'll find is when you blur an area, you smooth out any noise that's in the picture, but the areas that you leave sharp will remain with a little bit of grain in them. So you just want to create a sort of a very subtle layer of noise that covers the whole picture and kind of ties everything together. The way that we're going to do this is first by adding a new layer in the layers palette. So just click that create new layer icon. So you'll get a blank layer there full of its checkerboard there showing it's completely transparent. And then we'll come up to edit, down to fill layer, and from this list I'm going to choose 50% grey. Click OK to exit that palette. The layer fills up with grey pixels, and we completely lose our portrait for the moment, but don't worry about that. First we'll come up to filter, down to noise, and we'll pick add noise, and an amount in here of something around 10% is okay. That's not too severe really. Make sure that the distribution is set to Gaussian and monochromatic is ticked at the foot of the palette. Click OK. And then to bring our portrait back through, up here at the top of the layers palette where it says normal, just click on that and it'll come down to the blending mode called linear light. As soon as you do that, the background layers there will pop through, but the effect is looking a little bit over the top. We don't want that much noise, so what we want to do is just click on the opacity slider in the layers palette, and we'll drag that down to something around 25 or 30%. And as I say, that just gives us a kind of a light dusting of noise which ties those smooth areas and the sharp areas together. If I just click it on and off, you should be able to see the difference. We're not really adding a whole lot of noise to the model. We're certainly not kind of breaking that up. Could just drop it maybe down to about 20%. But we're just creating a kind of a consistency between those fuzzy areas and those that are sharp. Okay, so back out to a full view, and that's our portrait with a nicely blurred background completed. The final thing you need to do once you're done working on all these different layers is crunch them back down into a single background layer. So come up to layer and down to flatten image. And now you're all ready to either save the image or print it out. It's pretty quick and easy to do, and best of all, the results are well worth it. So give it a try in your own pictures, and I'll see you next time.